When my brother and his wife pushed a check under my nose, claiming it was for a family investment, I signed without a glance. 6 months later, they realized the signature they wanted had already signed away everything they owned. Before watching the video, please tell us in the comments from where you are watching this video. The day I signed the check, the house smelled like lemon cleaner. Sunlight slid across the counter where Lydia set iced tea and cookies. Derek paced the tiles, thumb rubbing his old ring like a habit. "It's a small formality," he said, voice easy and practiced. Lydia slid a blue check across the island and kept smiling. "Family investment, Ethan. You'll be proud later," she said, steady and pleasant. I noticed the blank memo line and the neat, printed amount. The number wasn't huge, but not pocket change for a Tuesday. I felt an itch behind my ribs that didn't leave quickly. The pen felt heavy, like it belonged to someone lazier than me. "You sure about this?" I asked, trying to slow the moment down. Derek grinned fast and said, "We're on a deadline." Lydia added, "Vendors need confirmation today, then paperwork follows tomorrow." Their words moved the air, smoothing edges, inviting me to relax. I told myself families handle things first and fix details later. I wanted calm to beat doubt that wouldn't name itself. I signed with the same neat signature used for my mortgage. Derek clapped my shoulder and said, "Knew you'd come through." After they left, the house felt too big for afternoon quiet. I rinsed the glasses and watched lemon pulp spin down the drain. My phone buzzed with Derek's thumbs up and a dollar sign. I typed, "Keep me posted," then deleted it before sending. I tried again, "Send the agreement when ready," and pressed send. He replied, "Absolutely," then added 3 rockets like a promise. The reply felt like a sticker over a cracked window. I turned on the ball game and let the noise work. The announcer's voice missed the plate, and my doubts stayed awake. "What exactly is the investment vehicle?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Derek shrugged and said, "Short-term liquidity for a supplier discount." Lydia added, "It's timing, not risk. We just need a bridge." My mother smiled like peace had finally rented the table. "You boys together again," she said, squeezing Derek's sleeve. Derek leaned in and said, "Trust goes both ways, Ethan." I let the little brother comment slide and asked for a prospectus. Lydia said, "We're finalizing it. The attorney's polishing the language." I nodded, but the itch returned, tracing lines I couldn't follow. Back home, I pulled a file box from the closet and worked. I listed what I knew, then circled gaps until the page looked crowded. The gaps didn't shrink just because I stared longer. I ran the math, even the numbers he said too quickly. A bridge needs collateral, terms, and schedule, not slogans and charm. My gut wasn't drama, it was math waiting for documents. I decided to call my bank the next morning after coffee. I told myself it was routine, like checking smoke alarms. Sleep came thin, and I woke twice listening for my phone. Morning brought coffee and a polite banker named Carla on speaker. I asked about any pending withdrawals tied to my signed instrument. She said nothing was pending against my accounts at this time. "Was it a personal check?" she asked, careful with each word. I confirmed and gave the amount and date while watching steam rise. Carla paused, then said, "We can't honor third-party changes without verification." The phrasing tightened my shoulders more than I wanted. I thanked her, took notes, and watched the quiet kitchen clock. The path ahead felt narrow, but at least the floor stayed level. I drove to Derek's office above a vape shop on Center Street. The waiting room plants needed water, and the magazines were last summer. Derek wore the blazer he called his closing jacket and smirked. "You look tense," he said, waving me toward the chair. I stayed standing and asked for written terms and a schedule. He laughed and said, "You're acting like my auditor, not family." Lydia entered with a thick folder that felt strangely light. "Drafts are moving," she said, offering a timeline with friendly arrows. Derek added, "Have faith. You already signed. We're rolling." "Faith is not a document," I said, keeping my tone steady. Derek rolled his eyes and said, "This is why I streamline things." Lydia asked, "Do you want him to miss a rare discount?" I said I wanted a contract that matched each promise on the timeline. Derek leaned back and crossed his arms like a TV judge. "You signed. You're in. Don't yank the rug after the pistol." I set the folder down and asked for the real files. He smiled thinly and said, "You'll get them after the next transfer." I left with the itch burning harder, already planning my next move, all the way back home that night. The missing funds announced themselves with a breakfast buzz from my phone. The bank app banner glowed red, warning of a balance below threshold. 2 unfamiliar transfers sat there with the tidy label, Vendor sweep. The numbers were round, like someone prized symmetry more than honesty. Our household reserve paid Mom's caregiver, medications, and utilities without drama. That account stayed boring because boring is safe when health depends on schedule. Her caregiver auto draft had bounced an hour before my coffee. That alone turned my stomach harder than the alert. Somewhere, Derek had redefined family investment without my consent. By 9, I was at the branch asking for Carla, the careful banker. She opened the reserve ledger and leaned in, reading faster, then slower. There were added ACH authorizations last month, she said, each word deliberate. I asked who requested them and what document approved the links. She clicked and turned the monitor slightly, as if shielding me. Image on file shows your signature on a service enrollment, she said. Heat climbed my neck, but my hands stayed steady on the counter. Show me, I said, keeping my jaw relaxed. The screen displayed my signature over language I had never seen. The form welcomed processing partners and permitted linked sweeps through staged buckets. Derek had bragged about partners the way teenagers brag about horsepower. Those authorizations are not mine, I said, voice level and even. Carla nodded, lips pressed thin, like wishing the screen could apologize. The manager arrived and outlined steps for a freeze and formal case. You'll need an affidavit and a police report number, he said calmly. Carla offered to freeze the sweeps while I handled paperwork. List every endpoint attached to the reserve, I said. 2 nicknames jumped out, Derek's pitch phrase and Lydia's maiden name with digits. I stepped outside and called Derek because he authored this language. Unauthorized sweeps are hitting the reserve, I said, keeping my tone flat. He laughed quickly, like a lid slamming over a boiling pot. Relax. That's our partner moving funds between staging buckets, he said. Why did Mom's caregiver auto draft bounce at dawn? I asked. Timing, he said, and shoes clicked against tile through his phone. Cash settles by close. You won't remember this tomorrow. The sweeps are now frozen, I said, and let silence sit there. He exhaled hard, then hung up without another word. I called Mom next, because steadiness beats surprise when health bills matter. She was folding towels and asked why the caregiver sounded worried again. I told her the bank was correcting a routing error and watching balances. Your brother updated some forms to streamline everything, she said. Lydia had brought a compact scanner and cheerful brochures about preferred vendors. Mom remembered handing over her license for verification, then signing 2 boxes. I kept my voice even and asked her to hold off on any new forms. Let me stabilize payments, then I'll review everything, I said. She sighed with relief and thanked me twice. Back home, I spread statements across the table and started 3 months earlier. I marked every debit matching Derek's favorite phrases and comfortable posting times. 2 cashier's checks hit the reserve without memo lines or invoices. Between them sat a refund from a vendor I had never met. The refund credited an email alias echoing Lydia's maiden name backward. A separate micro deposit tested another link that failed 2 days later. I opened a legal pad and wrote questions instead of predictions or curses. Patterns survive spin. I prefer patterns to people's promises. The page filled with arrows that actually made sense. By noon, Lydia texted a photograph of a perfect almond salad captioned with hearts. Big meeting went great. Vendors thrilled. Please don't stress Mom, she wrote. I replied, sweeps are frozen. Send contracts and partner names by 3. She answered with a laughing emoji and typed, you signed the check. I signed a check, not perpetual authority over reserved funds, I wrote. The dots pulsed, disappeared. Then Derek called with an impatient inhale. You're making this adversarial, he said, trying a wounded big brother tone. You made it adversarial when you tapped Mom's caregiver money, I said. Invoices, receipts, partner agreements. Send them now. He pushed back with numbers and dates, too fast to be confident. I repeated each item until he slowed, then asked for the documents again. After close, he said, saying it like a promise he could outrun. The freeze stays until I review everything, I answered. You don't understand liquidity, he snapped, trying one last curveball. I understand permission, and you don't have it, I said plainly. He muttered something about family loyalty and trust going both ways. I wrote his claims down because facts survive tone and tempo. Then I turned my phone face down and let quiet do its work. The affidavit took the afternoon, line by line, box by box. The notary stamped the pages with a steady, bored rhythm that calmed me. Back at the branch, Carla attached the report and extended the holds. She showed fresh attempts bouncing off the frieze like moths against glass. Someone tried 3 routes into the reserve within 40 minutes. Each route used near identical labels with a single letter change. They're probing for slack in the fence, Carla said almost apologetically. Good, I said. Let them learn the fence is steel. She nodded and set text alerts for any future tries. Evening arrived with quiet and the metronome click of Mom's hallway clock. I cooked simple pasta and waited for my hands to stop buzzing. Then I mapped Derek's promised settlements against attempts, refunds, and test deposits. The overlaps drew a clean line through Lydia's careful partner language. Every date matched something he had said at the kitchen island. One timestamp mirrored his smug promise about relief after close. Tonight. That would be my opening if I let patience finish the job. Tomorrow I would call an attorney and trade doubt for structure. Tonight I labeled my folder missing funds and closed it with care. I drove to the industrial park because Derek dodged specifics yesterday. The sky looked bleached and the wind smelled like rubber and heat. His company's sign leaned as if the screws felt tired. Inside, the receptionist flipped a magazine that was 2 months old. She recognized my face from holiday photos on Derek's shelf. Is he expecting you? She asked, polite but guarded behind the counter. He will want this meeting, I said, keeping my tone casual. Today. She dialed slowly and mouthed that he would be right down soon. While waiting, I studied framed articles praising growth from 3 summers ago. Nothing recent hung there, only sun-faded proof of a short sprint. Derek arrived with a grin that never reached his eyes anymore. You caught us on inventory day, he said, guiding me inside quickly. I counted 4 pallets labeled with expired promotional stickers and dust everywhere. These were moving fast last fall, he added, watching my face carefully. I asked about partner contracts, invoices, and those sweep authorizations you arranged. He waved toward a door and said, conference room, like a command. This is sensitive and evolving, he said, tapping the thinner folder twice. Evolving toward what? I asked, keeping my hands flat and still. Market headwinds, he said, letting the jargon take the blow again. Lydia entered wearing a crisp blazer and a careful expression today. She smiled professionally and shook my hand exactly once, not twice. We appreciate family flexibility during unusual supply conditions, she said calmly. I asked how flexibility matched unauthorized sweeps from Mom's caregiver account. She paused, then said, temporary alignment error, like dental talk for pain. I opened the thinner folder and saw a polished deck. Charts trended up until last year, then dropped like a step. Vendor emails referenced discounts with redacted totals and missing dates again. This is marketing, not accounting, I said, sliding the folder back. We need contracts, receivables, liabilities, and your actual past due schedule today. Derek tried smiling again, then reached for the heavier folder nearby. This one held statements with black bars across crucial lines everywhere. A red stamp read, preliminary, as if that granted immunity forever. I read balances twice and saw a negative float masked by deposits routinely. Who is funding the float? I asked, underlining numbers only mentally. Our network, he said, voice suddenly flat, impatient, and completely tired. Lydia added, including private lines extended from trusted family sources. That line ends today, I said, tapping the red stamp firmly. Derek leaned forward and lowered his voice like a nightclub whisper. Show me the commitments, I said, since he insisted on banker rolls. He opened a binder labeled Vendor Program and flipped bright tabs. Embedded letters promised rebates for volume, but deliveries still lagged. Accounts receivable listed customers that closed before Thanksgiving last year already. I pointed to one name and said, they liquidated last year. Lydia said, their parent revived the brand. Receivable remains collectible today. From a new entity with no obligation, I said, staying even always. Derek lifted a shoulder and said, paper says otherwise. Counsel agrees. Whose counsel? I asked, watching his eyes more than all words. Ours, he said, and Lydia didn't even look away. The plant manager knocked and handed Derek a clipboard with numbers. Carrier wants cash on delivery again, he said, watching Lydia instead carefully. Derek signed a stub and said, we'll wire after settlement today right now. I said nothing, because the room had already answered loudly enough. The plant manager left, and silence stretched across the table surface. You froze our sweeps, Lydia said, her voice thinner now indeed. Our reserve protects Mom's health and household, I said simply and clearly. Derek rubbed his ring and said, "You went nuclear over technicalities." "I responded to theft," I said, choosing the plain word deliberately. He flinched, then laughed once like a slamming door in winter. "We can unwind this if you relax the freeze until Friday," Lydia said. I asked what changed by Friday besides new excuses and pressure today. She said, "A settlement from a distributor clearing a quality hold. Name the distributor, invoice and settlement reference." I said immediately then. Derek cut in, "You don't talk to our partners directly, Ethan." "They're not partners if they require my mother's money," I said curtly. "Family shares short-term pain for long-term gain," she said quietly there. "Family doesn't hide liabilities behind kitchen smiles," I answered evenly and plainly. Derek pushed back and stared at vents, searching for confidence anywhere. "We're pivoting to licensing with lower inventory risk," he said finally. I asked to see signed letters of intent or schedules today immediately. He produced 2 emails with praise, bullet points, and no signatures included. One sender's domain bounced when I quietly sent confirmation from my phone. I slid the printed bounce across the table without commentary or explanation. Derek blinked slowly, then said, "The CEO uses personal domains sometimes. Then he can confirm from either one by lunchtime," I replied softly. Lydia's phone vibrated, and she turned its screen down, expression carefully neutral. I left because staying only fed their bluff with attention and time. I drove to the courthouse records office on Jefferson Street downtown immediately. Public filings tell stories people won't tell over iced teacups. An attached rider carried my signature, photocopied awkwardly across a guarantee. The date matched that family investment afternoon at my kitchen. Someone inserted my check signature into a guarantee I never saw. Heat cooled into something steadier, almost surgical and bright inside. The investment was a front, the money gone, the trap visible. I called an attorney, ready to replace trust with structure. I chose the diner because neutral ground makes lies feel less comfortable. The booths were cracked red vinyl, and the coffee tasted like memory. I sat facing the door and counted 4 beats between bell rings. Derek arrived first, checking his phone like it owed him rent. Lydia followed with a warm smile she used for waiters. I kept my folder closed and ordered eggs just to slow time. "This looks dramatic," Derek said, sliding into the booth opposite me. "It's simple," I said, keeping my voice steady and my sentences practical. "You moved money without authority and forged a guarantee using my signature." The server poured coffee, and Lydia thanked her with professional warmth. The bell rang again, and quiet filled the space like steam. Derek laughed too soon, then softened the sound as if it were friendly. "You're reading things out of context," he said, spreading his hands wide. Lydia added, "Your signature appears because you signed the check that day." "A check isn't a blanket authorization or a guarantee," I answered calmly. Derek leaned forward and whispered, "You should have read before you signed, Ethan." I took the photocopy from my folder and slid it across. "This is not a check. It's a guarantee with pasted signature." Lydia studied the page like it surprised her just enough. "That looks like a working draft," she said, tapping the margin. "Drafts don't get recorded with writers at the courthouse," I said quietly. Derek looked away and his mouth flattened like a closing window. "We're fixing the cash cycle," he said, trying confidence with less oxygen. "Your freezes are strangling operations and pushing partners to panic," Lydia added. I let them talk for 30 seconds without interruption or engagement. Words flooded the booth, all urgency and no responsibility or measurable steps. "Invoices, contracts, and receivables," I said, holding my palm steady. "Name them and we'll call each counterpart right here together today." Derek shook his head and said, "Partners expect discretion, not interrogation at a diner. Partners expect money that exists," I said, not changing my voice at all. Lydia glanced at the server and lowered her volume 2 notches. "You're turning family into an audit, and that's cruel," she said. "Cruel was touching Mom's caregiver account to fund expired pallets," I answered. Derek's jaw tightened, then relaxed like a practiced gym rep again. "The caregiver draft bounced because your freeze misaligned settlement timing," he said. "The draft bounced because your sweeps drained the reserve before dawn," I said. Lydia sighed carefully and said, "We all signed up for shared sacrifice." "Mom didn't sign anything except the scanner you carried," I replied. Derek straightened and pointed at the photocopy again, voice clipped. "You handed us that signature. This is on you, Ethan." I held his stare and kept my hands open on the table. "Accountability isn't a feeling, it's a paper trail with dates," I said. "We'll follow the paper, not the pitch," I added slowly. Silence stretched until the server arrived with plates and toast. We ate like strangers who knew each other too well already. Derek broke the quiet first, voice lower and less rehearsed today. "What do you actually want?" he asked, finally sounding like himself. "Full reversal of unauthorized transfers and termination of all linked sweeps," I said. "A written admission regarding the guarantee's fabrication and its immediate withdrawal." Lydia shook her head and stared out the window at the wash. "Those demands would kill the company by Friday," she said, tone thin. "Then Friday is honest," I said, taking a slow sip. Derek rubbed his ring and watched the parking lot like it held answers. "You're bluffing," he said, almost convincing only himself. I opened the folder to the courthouse indexing printout and affidavits. "These filings speak louder than holiday photos and iced tea speeches," I said. Derek read the top line and swallowed, then checked the stamp. "You filed already?" he asked, blinking like the light had changed. "I reported and froze theft from a healthcare reserve," I replied. "Everything else proceeds within procedures you love referencing," I added evenly. Lydia breathed out through her nose and counted backward with her eyes. "We can negotiate terms that protect your mother and our obligations," she said. "Send the contracts and actual schedules within 24 hours, I said. "Not decks, not redactions, not praise emails from dead domains," I added. Derek tried a final angle, one he saved for holidays and speeches. "Family protects family in public, no matter what happens privately," he said. "Public includes caregivers, vendors, and the courthouse index now," I answered. Lydia's voice softened, a change I recognized from closing attempts. "You don't want to torch the ground we all share," she said. "I want ground that holds weight without lying," I said calmly. "If your numbers are real, we'll see them before tomorrow's dinner." Derek pushed back from the booth and tossed a few bills toward the check. "You'll regret this tone when partners walk," he muttered, standing. "They already walked. They just forgot to lock the door," I said. The bell rang, and cold air followed them out to the lot. I stayed with my coffee and let my hands warm again slowly. Then I called Mom and told her caregiver to retry the draft at noon. I kept explanations short because reassurance works better than lectures with her. After that, I left a message with the records clerk for updates. My phone buzzed twice with unknown numbers I did not answer today. Back home, I reviewed my notes without turning them into speeches. The pattern looked simple now, cleaner than the fear that preceded it. They would send something dressed as proof, all polish and missing backbone. Tomorrow I would bring everything to a lawyer whose words become filings. Tonight I filed my folder away and listened to the furnace cycle. Robert Shaw's office looked like a library that paid its bills on time. Framed diplomas hung beside a framed map of the county's court districts. He greeted me with an easy handshake and an unreadable half smile. "Tell me the clean version first," he said, opening a legal pad. I described the check, the sweeps, the bounced caregiver draft, and the writer. He didn't interrupt, only noted dates and proper nouns with neat block letters. "You brought copies, not originals?" he asked, glancing at my folder. "Copies for you, originals locked at home," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Good," he said, and pulled a short checklist from the desk drawer. He scanned the writer and the pasted signature with slow, careful eyes. "The cut line is visible even on this copy," he said. "That suggests physical paste or crude digital insertion before scanning it." I felt my shoulders loosen slightly at his plain, non-judgmental tone. "What are our lanes?" I asked, needing structure more than comfort today. "Civil fraud, conversion, and declaratory relief to void the guarantee," he answered. "Potential criminal exposure exists, but we'll let law enforcement decide timing." He kept the pad angled so I could see each bullet's simple words. "We start with paper," he added, tapping the writer gently. "Paper beats charm when judges take the bench." His paralegal Tasha entered with a scanner, gloves, and labeled envelopes. "Chain of custody, always," she said, setting out evidence stickers and forms. Shaw turned to me and kept the rhythm slow and practical throughout. "We'll need the originals for the forensic examiner by tomorrow," he said. "A notary's affidavit on your signature habit strengthens the comparison." I nodded, thinking of the notary's steady stamp from yesterday afternoon. "Carla at the bank can certify statement copies and sweep logs," I said. "Get her notarized declaration on the unauthorized endpoints," he replied firmly. "Then we'll freeze more than the sweeps. We'll freeze the narrative." We reviewed the account statements using a ruler and a yellow pencil. Shaw marked each sweep with a letter, then wrote matching letters on a timeline. Patterns matter more than adjectives, he said, barely looking up. Note the timing before dawn and the mirrored labels, I added. He nodded once, then drew a box labeled intent around clustered dates. Their probes after the freeze help us, he said, approvingly practical. Repeated attempts show knowledge, not accident, of the restriction. He flipped to my courthouse printouts and found the recorded writer's index immediately. Filed 6 days after your kitchen signature, he said. That gap is where the forgery lived. At lunch, we walked to the annex for certified copies and stamps. The records clerk recognized Shaw and moved efficiently through drawers and printers. You're pulling everything tied to that writer, she confirmed, stamping pages. Shaw paid the small fees and exact bills from a thin money clip. Nothing theatrical, he said softly as we stepped into the hallway again. Judges appreciate tidy records and plain words more than speeches. I repeated the phrase to myself, letting the cadence calm me. Back at the office, Tasha logged receipt times and sealed exhibits methodically. This will read like a metronome, she said, smiling without ceremony. The forensic examiner, Dr. Flynn, met us in a room with bright lamps. He wore magnifiers that made his calm eyes look slightly larger than life. Show me the questioned signature and known exemplars, he said courteously. Shaw handed him copies, reserving the originals for the chain process. Flynn adjusted a lens and hummed quietly, a steady working sound. Pen lifts and pressure aren't consistent with a single continuous gesture, he said. This looks assembled, not authored, from a separate instrument entirely. He tapped the tail on the H, then the long cross on the T. These artifacts don't align with natural variation, he concluded. Preliminary opinion favors non-genuine composition. Shaw's plan unfolded like a junk drawer finally being sorted carefully. We file for temporary restraining orders and a declaratory judgment, he said. We notice depositions and subpoena vendor communications, bank logs, and device metadata. He drew a small triangle and labeled each corner with short nouns. Paper, people, and pixels, he said, as if teaching a class gently. Together, they tell a story without adjectives or family negotiations. I asked about Mom and how we shield her from courtroom echoes. We can request protective orders and narrow any references to health, he said. We keep testimony focused, relevant, and respectful to her dignity. Then we opened a surprise hidden inside Derek's own boilerplate templates. A vendor program participation form included a fallback security interest clause. Read the default paragraph aloud, Shaw said, sliding the page toward me. Failure to remit funds converts advances to joint security under escrow direction, I read. He smiled slightly, an expression that looked like a light coming on. They wanted leverage, he said, drawing a small star beside that paragraph. They accidentally granted leverage to the wrong person entirely today. I looked again, tracing each noun and verb like a precise street map. We can take control of the remaining inventory under this clause, he said. We kept legal talk in tight boxes that respected attention and time. Shaw summarized procedural steps in simple, practical English for my sanity. First, he said, we mail spoliation letters preserving devices, accounts, and documents. Second, we file for the restraining orders and declaratory relief tomorrow. Third, we record notices, asserting the fallback security interest over inventory today. Fourth, we set depositions and leverage production deadlines against available cash. He capped his pen and looked at me for any signs of doubt. Questions? He asked, voice measured, neither warm nor cold. Only one, I said. How do we avoid punishing the caregiver again? We maintain priority for those drafts in every filing we submit, he said. Tasha prepared letters while I called Carla to coordinate certifications calmly. We'll notarize the ledger extracts at 4, she said, steady as ever. I'll pre-print my declaration outlining unauthorized endpoints and blocked attempts, she added. Shaw drafted the spoliation letters, concise and sharp without menace. We notified Derek, Lydia, and their company's registered agent before sundown, he said. He printed the fallback security notices and handed me a rubber band. We'll record these at the courthouse before closing, he added calmly. The office hummed with controlled motion, nothing frantic, everything labeled once. I breathed easier because movement replaced the loops inside my head. We reached the recorder's counter with 6 minutes to spare before closing. The clerk flipped through the notices, checked names, and stamped each page. Filed, she said, sliding the receipt across with a practiced neutral nod. That sound is leverage becoming real, Shaw said, pocketing his copy carefully. Outside, the light had shifted, and the parking meters blinked evening. My phone vibrated with a call from Derek that I did not answer. The next vibration came from Lydia, then a text with a single question mark. Shaw looked at the screen and raised one eyebrow, almost amused. "Tomorrow," he said, "we let the paper start talking for us." Shaw called at 7 with a checklist that felt like steps. We would climb each one without jumping or announcing the destination. I brewed coffee and opened my folder labeled Inventory Control Notices. The security interest gave leverage, but leverage needs careful and steady hands. I wrote 3 objectives on a yellow note for today boldly: protect Mom's drafts, lock inventory, and make Derek overextend timing intentionally. Pressure without panic beats threats, speeches, and noisy social explosions always. I wanted silence carrying messages louder than accusations or pleading explanations. Today would build a runway for tomorrow's harder landing without drama. I parked out and picked up the keys like a tool. By 9, I stood at the warehouse door with stamped copies. The plant manager recognized me and swallowed like the air suddenly dried. "We need to keep things moving," he said, eyes tracking forklifts. "We will," I said, handing the recorded notice and receipt directly. He read the header twice, then asked whether Derek approved this. "He was notified yesterday before close," I said, voice calm today. "Outbound? Loads require escrow or cashier's check into the reserve now." He blinked, then nodded because clear rules beat noise in rooms. He gathered foremen and repeated the language without adding theater verbatim. I signed the visitor sheet and kept to a corner nearby. The first truck driver watched us with patient, professional curiosity today. I explained the notice and directed payment to the escrow account. He shrugged, called dispatch, and handed over the phone silently back. "If escrow posts, we ship," I said, rule stated without heat. The dispatcher cursed softly and asked whether this was temporary publicity. "It's lawful control under the fallback clause," I said simply here. "Inventory moves when funds post cleanly, otherwise it remains controlled otherwise." The driver nodded and started paperwork with a road-worn pen today. 10 minutes later, payment confirmed with a dull printer chime again. The trailer door thumped shut like certainty replacing rumor today. News travels fast when money changes routes on ordinary weekdays. By noon, 3 carriers had paid escrow before their trailers left. Each confirmation printed like ticket stubs proving rules beat speeches clearly. The plant manager finally asked about the reserve account's current status. "Caregiver drafts clear first, then utilities and basic services," I answered. "Everything else follows terms that make sense to sober people." He muttered about Derek promising miracles by lunch last Thursday ever. I said miracles are fine on calendars, not inside payable schedules. He smiled, tired and small, then returned to supervising loading. Forklifts beeped their patient metronome across concrete and steel beams. Derek arrived after lunch, walking fast like the hallway owed him. He saw the escrow receipts and tried a smile that failed today. "You're choking operations to prove a point," he said, rubbing. "We're protecting inventory until cash meets reality," I said evenly. Lydia stood behind him, whispering directions only he seemed hearing. "Partners won't tolerate hostage tactics," she said, rehearsed and bored. "Partners pay against product, not promises with decorative adjectives," I answered. Derek said, "Release today, and we'll true up Friday properly. Escrow posts, freight rolls, nothing personal about arithmetic," I said. They drifted away searching for a softer audience somewhere else. Shaw arrived calm, carrying envelopes and quiet authority like ballast. He greeted the manager and asked for a small corner table. We left the door half open so whispers wouldn't feel conspiratorial. "Device preservation orders filed," he said, laying copies like placemats. "We'll image laptops and collect emails under supervised protocol carefully." I handed my log of escrow confirmations and invoice numbers. "Good," he said, tapping a stubborn unpaid shipment on paper. "Use that leverage for discount without insulting anyone's dignity today." I called receiving and asked for the buyer's direct number. 2 calls later, freight shaved, while cash terms stayed intact, fully. The westbound carrier demanded a surcharge for a bridge closure. Derek balked and blamed me for changing trucking economics overnight. "Approve the surcharge or lose the customer," dispatch told him flatly. Lydia offered a discount that gutted margin and signaled desperation immediately. "No," I said, polite yet firm from the quiet corner. "Accept the surcharge if escrow posts the full adjusted amount." Derek stared, then signed the adjustment and forwarded shipping documents. Dispatch approved, and the driver finally smiled at time today. The trailer backed in while a spotter waved slow circles. Process replaced personality, and the building finally breathed easier again. Mid-afternoon, Lydia tried warmth that once fooled rooms easily before. "We can cooperate if you stop making everything adversarial," she said. "Stop calling responsible accounting adversarial," I replied, tone level and practical. She asked whether Mom needed another check before next Wednesday. "Caregiver schedule is funded through next Wednesday," I said, showing ledger. "We extend that horizon as escrow keeps clearing," I added. Printers hummed, and she asked if partners were actually happy. "They're paying because rules are clear and product exists," I answered. "Clarity isn't cruelty, it's how adults respect time and medicine." She nodded once, then went searching for Derek's next miracle. Late afternoon brought the phone call I planned for quietly. A distributor returned with cautious interest after avoiding us earlier. "We heard inventory moves against escrow now," the buyer said. "It does," I answered, "with pricing tied to verified condition and dates." He offered numbers respecting gravity without insulting intelligence or memory. I countered with prepaid transportation and immediate escrow upon scanning. He agreed after a pause and promised trucks by 10 tomorrow. We emailed a one-page confirmation with routing and disputes. Shaw reviewed the lines and removed one unnecessary compliment. Plain words outrun ego when numbers finally matter most. Dawn found trucks idling at the dock and Derek pacing grooves. Today's shipment held the last lots buyers still wanted without deep discounts. Dispatch warned cancellations would ripple across 3 routes before noon today. I confirmed escrow posts and watched the carrier's countdown toward cutoff. Shaw sat beside me, calm and exact, reviewing a single page. "They need a lien release," he said, tapping the margin once. I nodded and set the draft on the table between us. Its title read, "Direction to Escrow and Collateral Control." The first paragraph acknowledged default under their own vendor program language. The second directed third parties to follow my instructions until obligations were cleared. Derek charged in with sleepless eyes and a voice still rehearsed. "Release the hold, and I'll wire a goodwill payment Friday," he said. Lydia stood behind him, phone clutched like a borrowed courage token. "Escrow posts on scan. Release follows the direction," I said calmly. He frowned at the title and looked to Shaw for translation help. "It verifies default, states collateral, and directs third parties," Shaw answered. "It also preserves caregivers, utilities, payroll, and taxes in first position." Derek tapped the signature block and laughed without smiling at all. "You want me to sign my own handcuffs," he said. "You brought the cuffs the day you pasted my signature," I replied. He skimmed again and stalled at a paragraph labeled Admission. "I'm not signing a confession," he snapped, heat finally breaking tone. "Not a confession, a present tense description," Shaw said evenly. "You are behind, inventory is encumbered, and escrow governs movement." Lydia read slower, stopping at the caregiver priority schedule in the margin. "Those amounts are firm?" she asked, voice smaller than her blazer. "They're automatic and first," I said, keeping my hands visible. Derek drummed 2 fingers like someone counting remaining excuses aloud. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked, searching for bluff and oxygen. "Trucks leave empty, inventory stays secured, and your partners call me," I said. He tried compromise shaped like yesterday's speech, wearing new cologne. "Wire 50 now and release half the units as a gesture," he said. "No," I replied. "Money posts first, then movement follows exactly this page." Lydia sighed and asked for a pen that didn't feel like surrender. Shaw handed a plain black pen with no message printed anywhere. Derek hovered at the signature line, then tried one last angle. "You rescind everything by Friday if I sign," he demanded. "No," I said. "Control ends when obligations end, not when a calendar changes." He stared at the clock, blinked twice, and finally signed his name. I signed as secured party and handed copies to carrier and manager. Shaw emailed the direction to the agency address on their filings. "Direction effective now," he wrote, attaching receipts and exhibit numbers. The carrier signed acknowledgement of lien release tied to barcoded pallets. Forklifts sounded different, like a building finally exhaling practiced panic. Derek watched motion he no longer controlled and flexed his hands uselessly. Lydia studied escrow instructions like a map to a safer coast. The plant manager posted a printout that matched our one-page rules. "Scan, escrow, release," he read aloud, almost grateful for plain order. The first trailer backed in and locked with a clean metallic thump. By noon, 3 trucks scanned and escrow pinged like rain on tin. I forwarded proofs to vendors who had threatened collections last week. Their tones shifted from warnings to guarded cooperation within minutes. One wrote, "We'll resume shipments under your direction only," almost with relief. Another asked whether returns and scrap would be audited after settlement. "Yes," I replied, with dates, photos, and payment on verified counts. Derek asked for a private word beside the dented file cabinet. He leaned against it and looked 10 years older immediately. "Is there a path where I'm not ruined at the end?" he asked. "There's a path where debts get paid and caregivers sleep," I said. "It requires transparency, not choreography. Starting now at your desk," I added. Lydia joined us and stared at the floor like it might answer. "I told him we couldn't dance through another quarter," she said. "You both built this rhythm," I replied, not spiking the ball. Shaw supervised device imaging in a windowless room with blinds closed. The technician mirrored laptops, pulled backups, and logged hash values carefully. Derek unlocked accounts one by one, each password a small surrender. I watched without glee and kept my checklist tight in the margins. "Tomorrow, we file amended notices and updated schedules with exhibits," Shaw said. "Tonight, escrow cycles payroll, taxes, and caregivers without drama. At 4, the distributor who dodged calls last month arrived with purpose. He walked aisles, scanned lots, and compared codes against his notebook. 'You cleaned the data,' he said, almost impressed and unexpectedly human. 'We cleaned behavior,' I answered, offering no extra sugar anywhere. He doubled his order, prepaid into escrow, and scheduled pickups through Monday." Derek stared, realizing the reversal lived inside his own paperwork. Lydia whispered, "You turned our pitch into cuffs, then kept the key." "We turned promises into instructions," I said, choosing plain language again. The plant manager shook my hand and returned to his forklifts. The building felt less nervous with every outbound door that rolled. Escrow posted a final ping before close, enough to refill the reserve. Shaw packed copies and said he'd draft tomorrow's filings early. "The reversal finishes when silence replaces alarms," he reminded me gently. I stood in the doorway and listened to forklifts settle into stillness. Mom texted, asking whether the caregiver needed anything changed for tomorrow. "All funded," I replied. "Dinner at 6. Pasta and salad tonight." Derek sat alone at the end of the conference table. "This keeps going if you keep telling the truth," I said. He nodded once, the smallest admission he had ever made to me. The fall began quietly, which made it feel heavier than a crash. Shaw filed amended notices at 9, and the clerk stamped them without ceremony. The judge set a status conference for the afternoon on a crowded docket. Vendors submitted short declarations confirming escrow and receipt of goods. The bank produced logs of blocked sweeps and the early morning probes. Tasha stapled exhibits until the files looked like bricks with tabs. Derek arrived late, jacket wrinkled and eyes sliding around the hallway. Lydia sat 2 seats away from him, whispering to her own attorney. I kept my notes simple, numbered, and free of adjectives or spikes. When our matter was called, the courtroom's ventilation hummed like a steady metronome. Shaw spoke in the same plain tone he used at his desk. "We request to maintain the status quo under secured control," he said. "Caregiver, payroll, taxes, and utilities are funded through escrow without dispute." He described the rider, the pasted signature, and the fallback clause calmly. The judge asked 3 questions about timing, notice, and harm if altered. Derek's attorney argued hardship and reputational damage that sounded rehearsed. The judge looked at the stamped exhibits and the bank's declarations again. "You created this structure. You will now live within it," she said. "The temporary restraints remain, and discovery proceeds on the schedule." Her gavel didn't slam. It clicked the way a latch settles shut. Derek exhaled like something important had finally left his chest. By noon, our imaging vendor returned a list of recovered email threads. The thread showed cut and paste drafts of my signature in several versions. Lydia's name didn't appear on the composition files, but her comments did. "Use the clean crop," one bubble read, with a timestamp from winter. Her attorney leaned toward Shaw and offered limited cooperation immediately. "My client will meet to proffer facts related to document handling," she said. Shaw kept his expression neutral and asked for devices and dates. Lydia stared at the table and nodded once without lifting her eyes. Derek watched the exchange like a person waiting for a fire alarm. "You were there for all of it," he said to her quietly. She didn't answer, and the room held its breath a second. Afternoon brought partner calls that felt different from last month's threats. They wanted clarity, not charm, and we had plenty of clarity now. I explained the escrow rules and the direction letter in 30 seconds. They asked who signed the admission paragraph tied to default this morning. Derek Cole, I said, and emailed the acknowledgement already. Their tones shifted from performative concern to practical schedules and routing. One asked about returns protocol and whether scrap counted under settlement. Documented, photographed, and paid on verified counts, I answered again. The inventory sale plan began to look like a blueprint instead of a plea. Derek paced behind his office door while forklifts measured out the afternoon. Payroll loomed like a familiar cliff, and escrow handled it without drama. Employees signed for checks and went back to work in tired silence. The plant manager posted a simple note thanking crews for patience and effort. Lydia packed a box, quietly, and told the receptionist she needed an hour. "We should talk," she said to me in the hallway near the copier. "Tomorrow," I said, because today favored procedures over confessions. Derek cornered me by the break room with a small, brittle laugh. "You finally happy?" he asked, and his voice didn't find a place to land. "I'm satisfied the caregiver will not miss another draft," I said. He stared at the linoleum and nodded like a man counting tiles. Near closing, the landlord's agent arrived with a calm, tight expression. He handed Derek a default notice for unpaid rent and utilities. Lydia's attorney stepped between them and asked for a brief extension. The agent pointed to the escrow confirmation and shrugged one shoulder politely. "We'll deal with arrears through the controlled flow," he said. Derek's shoulders sagged as if the building finally stopped propping him up. Shaw presented a short dissolution framework he drafted in the afternoon. Asset purchase of saleable lots. Settlement schedule for residual liabilities, he said. Admission attached, guarantee voided, and a consent judgment if dates slip. Derek read slowly, reached the admission paragraph, and stopped breathing for a beat. We moved to the conference room with the blinds half closed. Lydia sat with her attorney and a neat stack of labeled devices. She confirmed the scanner sessions at my mother's table, dates, and document names. "I brought the brochures and forms," she said, voice flat and careful. "He applied the signature cut after I left that night." Derek flinched, then tried to smile, then didn't bother again. Shaw captured the proffer in a short memo with signatures and times. "This is not immunity, it is cooperation," he said evenly. Lydia nodded and slid a ring onto the table without comment. "I'm not staying for the encore," she said, and stood quietly. The distributor from yesterday doubled down and prepaid for 2 more routes. Escrow pinged in a steady rhythm that felt like a machine working. We transferred sums to clear taxes, payroll, and the caregiver schedule. The ledger began to look like something disciplined instead of injured. Derek signed the dissolution framework with a pen that didn't shake. The landlord agreed to hold evictions in exchange for staged arrears from escrow. A secured buyer took the best equipment at a fair documented price. Scrap and obsolete lots moved to salvage under photos and counts. Each step reduced noise and raised certainty by a measurable inch. The company shrank down to facts that no longer required adjectives. That night, we sat at Mom's table with bowls of pasta and quiet. I told her the judge kept the structure and the caregiver was safe. She breathed out and patted my hand like when I was 10. "Your brother is lost," she said softly, "not asking for a debate tonight. He is accountable," I said, and kept the rest inside my chest. Derek texted, an apology that read like a receipt, not a thought. Lydia sent nothing, which for once felt like the correct amount. Shaw emailed a list of tomorrow's filings and a short sentence. "We're nearly through." I turned off the kitchen light and let the house hold the quiet. Morning brought signatures at the courthouse and a final, short hearing. The judge signed the order voiding the guarantee and approving the framework. Derek stood with his hands clasped and stared at the floor tiles. Lydia appeared with her attorney and confirmed the proffer in 2 sentences. Shaw thanked the court with the same plain tone he always used. Outside, trucks lined up, scanning lots tied to yesterday's purchase orders. The plant manager waved once, then got back to work without ceremony. I watched the door close and felt the weight change in my ribs. The fall didn't sound like sirens. It sounded like paper finally settling. It was quieter than I expected, and that was a gift. The week after the order felt like a room finally aired out. Vendors who once called with threats now called with schedules and thanks. I returned each message with the same simple script we used in court. Escrow governs, confirmations go out by close, and photos follow delivery, I said. People responded better to rules than to charm, and I never forgot that. Shaw's office sent me a neat binder with tabs for every exhibit. I set it on a shelf beside my tax returns and mortgage papers. It looked ordinary there, which calmed me in a practical way. Ordinary beats dramatic when your mother's health depends on a clock. I wanted the next chapter of my life to be as ordinary as possible. Mom asked for a ride to church on Sunday, which felt like normal. She walked slow, held my arm, and greeted people by name at the steps. After service, we sat in the foyer with paper cups of coffee. "Is it really done?" she asked, eyes softer than last month. "The court order stands. The caregiver is funded, and the business is winding down," I said. She nodded and let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. "I told Derek he cannot visit until we speak with Pastor Hill," she said. The words were gentle but firm, the way a levy speaks. I didn't cheer because this wasn't a sports game. It was health. Boundaries are medicine when apologies aren't ready or honest yet. Monday, I met with Carla at the branch to finish the last steps. We removed every authorization that ever touched the reserve or its neighbors. She printed a short stack of confirmations and stapled them at the counter. "You'll get overnight copies of the final affidavits," she said, steady as always. I thanked her, then added a small authorization for the caregiver's backup account. "Redundancy prevents scary mornings," she said, smiling like a teacher should. "We set alerts to buzz for anything unusual over trivial amounts. I lowered the threshold because quiet accounts deserve extra attention. And care. The app pinged twice that day for things we already expected. Nothing else moved without telling us first, and that felt like air. Shaw called midweek with a tone that sounded like clean paper. "Guarantee voided, default admission on record, escrow continuing per schedule," he said. I asked about the criminal lane and whether we needed more statements. "Detectives have the file. They'll decide whether to charge," he answered. "Your role remains the same, factual, available, and briefly spoken." I appreciated the verbs more than any speech he could have written. He also sent a plain English summary of the dissolution agreement and dates. I read it twice and tucked it beside the binder on the shelf. Clear documents do something medicine can't always do for nerves. They let sleep return without permission slips from memory or fear. I visited the warehouse on a sunny Thursday and found order. Pallets were tagged, aisles clear, and the plant manager looked younger somehow. He showed me final scans, receipts, and a whiteboard with 3 remaining loads. "We'll be out by Tuesday if trucks stay honest," he said confidently. We shook hands and didn't pretend we'd become friends through this. Work can be respectful without pretending to be family, I've learned. Lydia wasn't there, and no one asked about her boxes or ring. I had heard she moved into a short-term rental near the lake. Her attorney sent one more letter confirming device transfers and a timeline. The line read like a ledger, not a plea, and that was fine. Derek tried calling twice, but left no message either time. He eventually sent a text with a question I could answer factually. "Am I free to apply somewhere not covered by the consent judgment?" he wrote. I replied, "Yes, outside listed entities, and while honoring current schedules." He then asked, "What should I say in interviews about last quarter?" I typed, "Tell the truth in plain words without blaming anyone." There was no victory in my thumbs, only clarity and boundaries. Later that day, Pastor Hill called and asked to host a family meeting. "We'll focus on health, safety, and honest sentences," he said. I agreed because structure had worked everywhere else this month. Faith, like law, lives better with real calendars and short rules. At home, I put the house back the way it had been before. The folder stack returned to one reachable shelf and a fireproof box. I cooked chili and set out bowls like a small ritual for calm. The caregiver arrived on time, smiled, and confirmed the deposit posted early. We reviewed next month's schedule and backup phone numbers without drama. After dinner, Mom asked me to play the old songs on the radio. We sat in that warm, ordinary quiet that doesn't ask for speeches. "I'm proud of you for choosing the steady way," she said. "Steady is what keeps the lights on," I answered truthfully. The house answered with the soft hum of a well-tuned life. When Friday came, I took the afternoon off and walked Main Street. The window at the shoe repair shop displayed a brown pair I'd been eyeing. I bought them, not as a reward, but as a promise to walk forward. Outside, a breeze carried diner smells, and a siren far away. My phone stayed mostly silent, which felt like a new luxury finally. Shaw texted once to confirm the last escrow transfer for payroll. "All quiet here," he added, which was my favorite sentence now. I headed home by the long route, letting sidewalks replace courthouse floors. The week's weight settled into my shoulders in a different way. It no longer pressed down, it reminded me to stand up straight. The last hearing ended, and life began to sound normal again. Paper replaced adrenaline, and routines replaced alarms that once ruled mornings. I woke, brewed coffee, and checked the reserve like a habit. The numbers stayed steady, and the caregiver texted simple confirmations. Steady is a promise you keep with small boring choices daily. I learned that revenge can be quiet and fully documented. It looks like receipts, not speeches, and signatures, not threats. My brother wanted my signature to float lies over soft words. I used signatures to anchor truth and keep medicine on schedule. The difference was direction, not volume, and the court recognized that. Pastor Hill hosted the meeting in a small room behind the sanctuary. He set ground rules that sounded like handrails for a steep staircase. Short sentences, no blame, and a focus on repair. He said, Mom sat beside me, hand warm, steady, and ready to end chaos. Derek arrived late, took a chair, and stared at the floor. "I'm sorry," he said, voice small and hoarse from bad nights. "I didn't deliver a speech. I didn't invent a new sermon. You signed the admission and followed escrow," I said plainly. "Finish the schedule and tell the truth when asked," I added. He nodded once and didn't argue with gravity this time. Then afterward, Mom asked me to drive the long route home. The sunset sat low over the tire shop and the laundromat. She watched the clouds like someone remembering a kinder calendar. "Do we forgive him?" she asked, not demanding, only curious. "I forgive the future, not the past," I said carefully. "Forgiveness to me means clear rules keeping people safe," I added. She squeezed my hand once, a small, grateful, practical gesture. "That sounds like love, just in work clothes," she said gently. We reached the driveway, and the porch light clicked on by timer. Predictable light is a better apology than flowers arriving after damage. Shaw closed the file with a final letter that respected silence. "Matters concluded per order. Escrow closed. Residual schedules satisfied," it read. He met me for coffee across from the courthouse steps. "What did you learn you didn't expect?" he asked quietly. "That paperwork can be kindness when used to protect the vulnerable," I answered. He nodded like a teacher hearing a student name the right tool. "And that calm wins when facts outlast performance," I added. He smiled once, folded the receipt, and left a fair tip. "You built a bridge out of rules," he said at the door. "Keep crossing it, and you won't need me again soon." Derek texted updates every Friday for 8 weeks without fail. Each message was short, factual, and free of stage fog. "Payment posted, balance reduced, final vendor closed," he wrote one morning. I replied with one word most weeks: received. The absence of drama felt like an earned luxury. One evening he called and asked to visit Mom on Sunday. "Pastor will join for 10 minutes first," I said calmly. "Then you can sit and talk about normal things." He agreed without a sigh, which felt like progress measured in inches. In families, inches matter more than miles shouted from podiums. The lesson signed in ink was not about winning. It was about direction, custody, and respect for simple, honest schedules. Revenge, when done right, looks like accountability written in plain English. It counts caregivers first and leaves room for ordinary dinners. It says no to rush and yes to receipts and calm afternoons. I learned to trust what survives photocopies, not what sparkles at brunch. I learned to value witnesses who file, not cousins who clap. Most of all, I learned my signature belongs to my judgment. If you found this story meaningful, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more grounded stories like this one, subscribe for the next chapter of real life.